Hello, YouTubers, and welcome to Level-Headed News. This is your host, Brenda. 16 articles for you this morning, and all the URLs are in the description of this video for your convenience. First one here is off of Liberty Writers. It says, "Blessings granted. What Pope Francis just gave Trump will make God smile." Donald Trump is a man who can make miracles happen. Everyone was expecting President Donald Trump's meeting with Pope Francis to go poorly. Well, sorry, it went better than good. It went great. The Pope was slightly cold when Trump arrived, but by the end of the But by the end, the U.S. president had melted away his scowl into a big smile from which laughter abounded. The Pope was so impressed, he gave Trump a special gift. Like the three wise men from the Bible, the Pope granted President Trump three holy gifts as well: an emblem of peace molded into a beautiful plaque, a message of peace for Trump, aka Man of Peace, a selection of Bible and words to express and share love of the gospel. The focus on peace in the gifts is clearly a reference to the amazing peace efforts made in the Middle East by Trump this week, which led to Palestine President Abbas calling him the man of peace. To see so much warmth towards Donald Trump from a man who once questioned Trump's Christian faith publicly is proof of the power of our president. It is time we let the nation see that Trump is changing the world for the better, and pretty much everyone can see it except them. The next article is off of BizPac Review. As soon as the hamster catches up here, he's a-running. Here we go. Media shocked as President Trump rips NATO leaders to their faces. Stop sticking at payers. President Donald Trump stood before members of NATO on Thursday and laid the law down to their faces. The president lambasted the many members nations being the required 2% of their GDP toward the organization. President Trump scolded the 23 of the 28 member nations that are not meeting their obligations and dedication ceremony for NATO's new headquarters. Nations owe massive amounts of money from past years, the president said. We have to make up for the many years lost. Fair to the people and taxpayers of the United States, he said. If NATO countries complete contributions, then NATO would be even stronger than it is today, especially from the threat of terrorism. The gathered leaders looked shocked and dismayed by the president's candor. Minister Xavier Bettel, newly elected French President Emmanuel Macron, Prime Minister Charles Michel appeared dismayed as they spoke among themselves while the president delivered his speech. It was the look of people who just realized that there is no nonsense man in the White House these days. Many reporters noticed and were seemingly shocked. We're putting out tweets, and I'll read one of them here. It says, the look on NATO leaders' faces as, well, then it jumped on me. Hang on. Get it back here. Okay, the look on NATO leaders' faces as Trump trashes them just feet away. And there's a picture of them looking rather dismayed. Even CNN's Jim Acosta seemed impressed. Saying, remarkable, the President of the United States just stuck it to NATO. Many on social media had comments as well that they put out on Twitter, such as Joe Walsh saying, Trump on NATO's front lawn. NATO nations owe massive amounts of money to U.S. taxpayers, and there's several others there. I can read them, and it says, and while some on the left were aghast that the president asked NATO members to pay their fair share, others saw the irony in it. such as one here says, on taxes, the left wants everyone to pay their fair share. On NATO, the left is pissed Trump wants everyone to pay their fair share. Uh, the next article is off of Conservative Tribune. And the hamster is running. Here we go. Trump pledges to fix failing Venezuela. In a conference with Colombian President Manuel, President Donald Trump said that the United States render humanitarian aid to people of Venezuela, a country in which stability is quickly crumbling. Venezuela, mauled by a failed socialist government trying to maintain a hold on power, has descended into a nightmare state for many of its citizens and doesn't look like it will improve quickly. President Trump won't have that. People don't have enough to eat, he said Thursday, according to an official White House transcript. People have no food. There's great violence. And we will do whatever is necessary, and we will work together to do what is necessary to help with fixing that, he added. And I'm really talking on a humanitarian level. Partnering with Colombia, which shares a border with Venezuela, to help bring stability to the region. Said in the conference, a stable Venezuela is beneficial to more than just Venezuelans. As soon as the hamster brings it on up here a little bit, I'll read the rest of it. Everyone wins. The stable and peaceful Venezuelans, that again, the stable and peaceful Venezuela is the best interest in the entire hemisphere, and America stands with all of the people in our great hemisphere yearning to be free, he said. We will be working in other countries on the Venezuelan problem. It's a very, very horrible problem, he said. The next article is off of World Journalism. Set to announce major new initiative while in Italy. President Donald Trump landed in Rome on Tuesday, a day ahead of his first ever meeting with Pope Francis, as well as with leaders of Italy's government. On Tuesday, National Security Council official Lander administration will soon be announcing a $390 million in famine relief aid for Somalia and Yemen, as well as some additional African nations. Yemen are currently failed states and hotbeds for radical Islamic terrorism. Friedlander emphasized to World and other reporters participating in the call that the president intentionally with leaders of three faiths birthed in the Middle East: Christianity, Judaism, and Islam, during his first overseas trip, to emphasize the need to work together to combat terrorism and promote understanding. During an interview Monday on Fox News, National Security Advisor H.R. McMaster said the entire trip is about human rights, about people coming together to fight the hatred. While in Saudi Arabia, Trump participated in the opening of the Global Center for Combating Extreme Ideology, which will monitor and counter terrorism propaganda online. There is some video in this if you want to pull it up. And Trump responded at the time by saying the Pope said something to the effect that maybe Donald Trump isn't Christian, okay? And he's questioning my faith. Surprised to see it. For a religious leader to question a person's faith is disgraceful. Two leaders will undoubtedly be quick to keep their differences in the past. if the subject of their previous comments should come up with reporters. Following his meeting with Pope and Italian Prime Minister and President, Trump will travel to Brussels, Belgium, to participate in a NATO summit on Thursday. He will then return to Italy for a meeting of leaders from the G7 nations of Canada, France, Germany, Japan, Italy, and the United Kingdom on Friday in Sicily. The president will meet with American and allied servicemen and women before returning to the United States. Breitbart says Trump's travel ban for Libyan immigrants vindicated Manchester suicide bombing. Says as the UK hunts down members and friends of Libyan immigrant family after one of its British-born sons committed the worst terrorist atrocity on UK soil in 12 years, the atrocity also highlights the dangers that made President Trump include Libya on the list of countries included in his much-maligned travel ban. Salman Abedi, who was born in Britain in 1994 after his family fled from Libya to escape their regime of dictator Muammar Gaddafi, detonated a bomb Monday in Manchester Arena at the end of the Ariana Grande concert. Abedi killed 22 people and injured dozens, many teenage girls and children. While it was initially thought that Abedi may have been a lone wolf, Greater Manchester Police Chief Constable Ian Hopkins told reporters authorities are now investigating a network of terrorists and have arrested 6 people in the UK, including Abedi's older brother. We're hyping up Abedi's supposed Britishness. He was a fan of Manchester United. Like many of his soccer-obsessed hometown, began a New York Times profile on the Islamic jihadists. Others have honed in on Abedi's Libyan roots as possible key to both his motivation and possible collaborators. Neighbors told reporters of Libyan flags being flown outside his home, as well as Abedi's penchant for praying in the street in Arabic. Abedi traveled back to Libya just weeks before the attack, purportedly to visit his parents. Abedi's father, Ramadan, was arrested by local authorities in Libya, as was one of Abedi's brothers. 2 Libyan authorities say traveled to Libya from Britain and who was a member of Islamic State, the New York Times reported. In the UK, questions have been raised about terror-related problems with Libyans in South Manchester, where Abedi was from. News reported Tuesday areas such as Fallowfield, Longsight, Rusholme, and Levenshulmer have high concentrations of Muslims, with 2011 census data registering a 53.8% Muslim population in Longsight, near where Abedi lived in Fallowfield. Abdullah, a Libyan refugee, was convicted last year of terror offenses after helping a convert to Islam to travel to Syria to join Islamic State. A family friend told The Guardian that Abdullah and Abdi knew one another. The Daily Telegraph, in an article called The Manchester Libyan Connection, a recruiting ground for jihadists, puts South Manchester terror problem in stark terms. In total, at least 16 jihadists who have either been convicted of offenses, have traveled to Syria, or have died while fighting with Islamic State hail from a 3-mile radius around South Manchester district, which was home to Abedi. These problems are the kind Trump was seeking to prevent in the U.S. by restricting immigration from terror hotspots, an issue which became a central part of his campaign. In January, Trump signed an executive order and a revised order after court challenge in March restricting immigration from a number of terror-prone countries, including Syria, Somalia, Iran, Sudan, Yemen, and Libya. However, Trump's order is still challenged in court, and new data shows worrying signs of illegal immigration amongst immigrants from the North African country currently being torn apart by violence. A Department of Homeland Security report on visa overstays released this week found that in fiscal year 2016, 43% of Libyan students in the U.S. on student visa overstayed their visas, suggesting monitoring of those in the U.S. is in need of improvement. In the UK, meanwhile, questions are being raised about not only the connections to Libya, but also how Abdi and his brothers, despite being monitored by security officials, were able to travel back and forth from the area without any alarm bells ringing. While many politicians and commentators in the UK initially attacked Trump for his travel ban, some believe that in the wake of the attack, the British public will be questioning its own policies when it comes to Muslim immigration. I think rightly be wondering, okay, we took this couple in as asylum seekers fleeing Gaddafi's Libya, and how did we get repaid? By their son going to Manchester Arena last Monday evening, Douglas Murray, author of Strange Death of Europe, said on a podcast for The Spectator. And this is now going to the root of the very big underlying bubbling problem across our whole continent, which is this fear. What if this is the future? What if even our acts of goodness get repaid in this way, he said. Next article is off of Breitbart. It says, zinc on interior budget. Obama, 15 billion revenue, cuts enough to pay for entire maintenance backlog for national parks. Calling President Donald Trump's proposed budget for fiscal year 2018 a new foundation for American greatness, Secretary of Interior Ryan Zink told reporters on Tuesday conference call that the loss of revenue suffered under the Obama administration could pay for the entire backlog of maintenance for national parks with about $3 billion to spare. In fact, the revenue lost through the Obama policies could pay for the agency's entire $11.6 billion budget and leave an almost $3 billion surplus. President Trump promised the American people he would cut wasteful spending and make the government work for the taxpayers again. And that's exactly what his budget does, Zink said in a press release announcement after the agency's budget. Working carefully with the president, we identified areas where we could reduce spending and also areas for investment, such as addressing the maintenance in our national parks and increased domestic energy production on federal lands, said Zink, who told reporters the budget plan would save taxpayers $1.6 billion. Zink told reporters the aid agency earned $18 billion from the offshore energy revenues, and after Obama put 94% of offshore resources off limits, that revenue fell to just north of $2 billion. Under the heading American Infrastructure, investing in interior $100 billion portfolio, the interior budget outlined by the DOI shows that $766 million plus $35 million from 2017 continuing resources to address the $11.3 billion deferred maintenance backlog in our national parks, which accounts for 73% of Interior's $15 billion deferred maintenance backlog. The Interior budget also reveals an all of the above energy strategy, Zink said. Specifically, the budget calls for $189 million for onshore oil and gas production to strengthen oil and gas and coal programs by improving the application and permitting processes. $1 million, an increase of 7 billion% in the CR for the 5-year offshore drilling plan and $78 million for renewables. To keep pace with anticipated project interest for renewable energy development. The press release announcing DOI's proposed budget also lists the legislative priorities that would save taxpayers $5.8 billion, including Arctic National Wildlife Refuge for energy development. To the budget is informative of the massive mission the agency faces as the steward of 20% of the nation's land and management of the outer continental shelf. Interior's budget covers a broad spectrum of activities, including operation of National Park Service, Fish and Wildlife Service, land management responsibilities of the Bureau of Land Management, delivery of quality services to Indians and Alaska Natives, outer continental shelf, called the OCS, management responsibilities of the Bureau's Energy Management and Safety, Environment, research, data collection, and scientific activities of the U.S. Geological Survey, water management projects of the Bureau of Reclamation, regulatory responsibilities, and reclamation activities of the Office of Surface Mining Reclamation and Enforcement, and support for the U.S. territories and other areas. The next article is off of humansarefree.com. It says WikiLeaks threatened to make example of Seth Rich. He was murdered. John Podesta threatened to make an example of Seth Rich to a grisly Podesta email published by WikiLeaks, and brand new evidence confirmed Seth Rich's murder was a political assassination ordered by the Democratic National Committee. Speaking to Fox 5 DC, Rod Wheeler, a former DC police homicide detective, confirmed there is tangible evidence Seth Rich was dealing with WikiLeaks before he was murdered. WikiLeaks tweeted a link to John Podesta's disturbing email, which takes on an even grislier aspect after Fox 5's news regarding the detective's confirmation that Seth Rich's murder was a political assassination, as well as exposing the DNC as an organization that punishes people based on suspicion alone. The question of what beyond internal discipline means is raised, and in light of recent revelations, the answers are grim. Later in the email chain, Joel Benenson said, "I think we have to make examples now of people who have violated the trust of HRC and the rest of the team." Robbie Mook also replied to Podesta's message, throwing his weight behind the bloodthirsty campaign manager, saying, "I would love an example being made." Speaking on News and Swir, a Dutch news channel, Julian Assange said that Rich's murder was a cause of concern for WikiLeaks whistleblower. There is a 27-year-old who worked for the DNC who was shot in the back, murdered just a few weeks ago for unknown reasons as he was walking down the street in Washington. The host, if Seth Rich was WikiLeaks source, Assange said, "I am suggesting risk, and they become concerned to see things occurring like that. They will be more concerned after the confirmation DNC is the kind of organization that makes examples of staffers they are suspicious about." John Podesta, Hillary Clinton, and the DNC went too far in assassinating Seth Rich. If that is the case, the internet has mobilized in his honor. The story has become too big for the mainstream media to suppress. With a trail of breadcrumbs in the Podesta emails and now Rod Wheeler's discoveries tying Seth Rich to WikiLeaks, the lid is about to be blown off the corrupt Democratic Washington, D.C. establishment. The full incriminating email chain can be read at a link here in this if you care to. And then there is an update with what appears to be a tweet from Anonymous. It says, "This will be my only post on the subject because the leaks are starting to come out. John Podesta uses SEIU people to do his dirty work. I'm not FBI close. Jennifer Palmieri had Seth murdered, but Robbie Mook and John Podesta found out about it and had Jennifer with Hillary and Huma silence Seth. The deed was done. Palmieri and Mook started pushing the robbery narrative, and the cops in D.C. went along with it. The D.C. police chief is corrupt and covering up for them. He is also a pedophile. If you would like to connect the dots, EIU people in D.C. that night. Jennifer Palmieri's strange tweets and Robbie Mook's insistence that it is Russia. If the right people are informed in the right order, Palmieri, Mook, Podesta, Abedin, and the Clinton machine, Felipe also will fall. Weiner is going to get immunity, it looks like. Murdered Seth Rich, connected to Podesta and Palmieri. Is off of Breitbart. And whenever the hamster decides to get with the program here, he's running. Here we go. Travel ban blocked again. Possible Supreme Court showdown. Panel of the U.S. Court of Appeals Circuit upheld an injunction against President Donald Trump's executive order curtailing travel and immigration from 7 Muslim majority countries on Thursday. Authority, in a 67-page opinion, affirmed the decision of the United States District Court for the District of Maryland, in essence holding that even an executive order that makes no mention of Islam be invalidated for violating the First Amendment Establishment Clause because of comments Trump and his associates made during and after the 2016 presidential election, calling the Establishment Clause a untiring sentinel for the protection of one of our most cherished founding principles. Chief Judge Roger Gregory's opinion for the court calls the travel ban an executive order that speaks with vague words of national security, but in context drips with religious intolerance, animus, and discrimination. President broad power to deny entry to aliens, but that power is not absolute, Gregory writes, discounting that the wide latitude given to the president under the Immigration and Nationality Act to deny entry to classes of travelers and immigrants on national security grounds justifies President Trump's executive order. Authority then launches into a litany of questions from President Trump, his advisors, and his campaign website made during and after the election season of 2016 is proof that the travel ban represents a government purpose to favor one religion over another, relying on Establishment Clause precedent that has never been applied in the immigration context. The court decided that the administration proffered purpose of keeping Americans safe from terrorism was a mere disfavoring the Islamic faith. One quote used to establish an unacceptable purpose was that of then spokeswoman Katrina Pearson on CNN that I think Islam hates us. We can allow people coming into the country, or I'm sorry, we can't allow people coming into the country who have this hatred. We've allowed this propaganda to spread all through the country that Islam is a religion of peace. This is the national security rationale for the order. conducting its own inquiry into the efficiency of the travel ban in protecting Americans. The majority city's former national security officials saying the order serves no legitimate national security purpose, no evidence of any new security risk emanating from these countries. The majority also gave credence to the claims of some of the Muslim plaintiffs by a litany of progressive legal groups led by the American Civil Liberties Union that the existence of the travel ban causes them irreparable damages by causing them feelings of disparagement and exclusion, or feeling disparaged in their community. They cite one plaintiff who claimed that his wife, who wears the hijab in public, senses a lot of hostility from people, and that his hijab-wearing nieces say that people make mean comments and stare at them for being Muslim. Each of the three dissenting judges filed separate dissenting opinions and joined in each other's. Judge Paul Niemeyer, relying on precedent that holds that the foreign affairs context in which the executive order operates is the apex of executive power, chastised the majority for its refusal to limit its inquiry to the text of the order itself. And looking behind the face of the government's action for the facts to show the alleged bad faith, rather than looking for bad faith on the face of the executive action itself, the majority grants itself the power to conduct an extraterritorial evidence suggested bad faith, which is exactly what the Supreme Court opinions have prohibited. Thursday's ruling represents a ruling of the merits of the case and cements the injunction preventing the order from coming into effect. The only avenue remaining for the administration to continue its defense is a petition for a writ of certiorari from the Supreme Court of the United States. This would set up a final showdown over the constitutionality of the travel ban before the nation's highest court. As the travel ban was always a temporary measure only to apply for 90 days, a term set to expire in June, the government will likely have to petition the Supreme Court on an emergency basis in order to have the court reconvene to hear arguments before the case becomes moot. The next article is off of Breitbart. It says ex-CIA Director John Brennan refuses to say whether Russia holds damaging info on Hillary Clinton. In testimony before the House Intelligence Committee, former CIA Director John Brennan refused to answer a question in an unclassified setting about whether the Russians posed damaging or possessed damaging information on Hillary Clinton that was not revealed during the 2016 presidential campaign. Brennan further testified that in his assessment, the Russians favored Donald Trump over Clinton largely because they despised Clinton for dealing with a businessman. This is a far cry from the unsubstantiated conspiracy theory that the Russians possessed damaging information on Trump. Even implied that this was the case. Indeed, the discussion about the Russians potentially holding negative information on a politician centered around Clinton. After Brennan made his assessment about the Russians hoping for a businessman to lead the U.S. government, explaining that in the past had some good relations with the businessmen who happened to elevate into positions of government authority, and Russians believed it was easier from a negotiating standpoint to deal with a businessman. Representative Tom Rooney, Republican of Florida, to ask Brennan whether he found in his review of the evidence that there was more damaging evidence of Secretary Clinton that was not revealed. What does it say about their to be actually rooting for her to win, he asked. Well, yeah, we can talk about it in the close, but As I said, I think that they anticipated Secretary Clinton was going to win the election, and so I believe, that they tried to damage and bloody her before the election. But also, I would have anticipated that had she been elected, that their efforts to uh, denigrate her would have continued during her presidency. So if they did collect more information about her that they did not release, I think they were probably disbanding it for a day. Brennan was talking about, hypothetically, about Russian husbanding information on Clinton for another day, and if they did indeed collect any such information. Later in the hearing, Representative Trey Gowdy, Republican of South Carolina, returned to the matter and asked for a clear yes or no answer as to whether the CIA had knowledge of the Russians holding damaging information on Clinton. Gowdy asked, Congressman Rooney and you were discussing generally the motive. I think it is. Let's just assume it is a given that the Russians did not like Secretary Clinton, President Obama for that matter, and desired negative things for her. But they also thought she was going to win. Was it your testimony that all of the information stolen was not publicly disseminated? Continued. Brennan says, no, I said if they had collected additional information, I think it was implied that the efforts to try to further hurt her if she became president. That information, any type of derogatory information about her, could have been husbanded for post-election period. And Gowdy says, all right, but do you know if negative information was husbanded and not disseminated? Brenda says again, I think that would be inappropriate to talk about in an open session like this. And Gowdy says, is it appropriate to both? I get not asking you about the nature of it. Is it inappropriate to answer yes or no, whether or not that information was husbanded but not disseminated? And Brennan says, my request would be that we could talk about that in a closed session. Gowdy says, okay, I'll honor your request and we'll talk about that in a little bit. Discussion about the Russian holding potentially damaging information on Clinton or her camp. In an extensive article published in April that included interviews with more than 30 and former law enforcement officials, congressional officials, and other government employees for the New York Times reported it hacked a document written by a Democratic operative that allegedly indicated Attorney General Loretta Lynch would have protected Clinton in the FBI probe of her private email server. According to the Times report, then FBI Director James Comey had information that alleged Lynch had been hacked by Russian intelligence, leading Comey to fear that Moscow could leak the document to call into question the independence of the U.S. government's Clinton email probe. Comey was asked about the alleged document at a hearing earlier this month before the Senate Judiciary Committee hearing on FBI oversight, where he repeatedly refused to publicly address significant questions about the document's existence. He insisted on holding those discussions in a classified setting. The discussion of the Russian holding potential blackmail information against Clinton comes after the unraveling of the 35-page dossier on Trump that contains wild and unproven claims that the Russians had information on Trump and sordid sexual acts, including the mock claim that Trump hired prostitutes and had them urinate on a hotel room bed. The dossier was compiled by former intelligence agent Christopher Steele, who was reportedly paid by Democrats and anti-Trump Republicans to investigate Trump. Conceded in court documents that part of his work still needed to be verified. During his testimony, meanwhile, Brennan explained why he believes the Russians allegedly favored Trump over Clinton. Rooney asked Brennan, tell us whether or not, from the information that you've looked at, it looks like the intelligence shows that Moscow is actually rooting for Donald Trump or Hillary Clinton, and why. That exchange continues, and it says, Brennan says, I think my assessment is that it was both. That's that a different time in the campaign, they felt that the fortunes of one candidate or the other was going up or down. I think that they, most of the time, believed that Secretary Clinton was going to win the election, and so their efforts to her were not just to try to diminish her chances of winning, but also to hurt her and for her eventual presidency. It is my assessment that they clearly had more favorable view toward Mr. Trump, and actions they were taking were trying to increase his prospects, even though I think that they probably felt as though they were not all that great. Why did they want her? Why did they want him and not her? Brennan says, I think it's a variety of reasons. One is that there had been a traditional, I think, PH animus, certainly between Mr. Putin and Secretary Clinton, as well as that there has not been a good relationship between the Putins and between Putin and the Clintons over the years. Felt that Secretary Clinton, with some of her actions while she was Secretary of State, led to some of the domestic disturbances inside Russia, and I think he was more concerned that she was going to be more rigid on certain issues, particularly on human rights and other issues. And Rooney says, what was Donald Trump going to do for them? Was it just that they didn't like Hillary? And Brendan says, no, I think they felt that Mr. Trump, being a bit of an outsider, that they have had in the past had some good relations with businessmen who happened to elevate into positions of government authority, as though from a negotiating standpoint that he might be more amendable to crosstalk. Brendan's assessment of Russia thinking is shared by Comey, who earlier this month confirmed in testimony that the basis for the intelligence community's assessment and allegedly wanted Trump was not because the billionaire was, as Senator Al Franken claimed during that hearing, without citing any evidence, ensnared in Russia's web of patronage. Instead, Comey provided two for Russia allegedly favoring Trump over Clinton during the 2016 presidential race. One reason, according to Comey, was that Putin hated Clinton and would have favored any Republican opponent. The second reason, Comey explained, was that Putin made an assessment that it would be easier to make a deal with a businessman than someone from the political class. This article is off of Breitbart. It says, Gaffney says Brennan testimony confirms no evidence of Trump, but abundant evidence of questionable Clinton Obama Russian activities. On Wednesday, Breitbart News Daily, Sirius XM host Raheem Kassam talked with Center for Security Policy President Frank Gaffney about testimony of former CIA Director John Brennan on Tuesday to House Intelligence Committee about Russian interference in the 2016 election. Kassam played a clip of Brennan giving a rather convoluted answer to a question about whether any evidence of actual collusion between the Trump 2016 campaign and the Russian government has been uncovered. Brennan ultimately admitted no such evidence has been found. I think the bottom line of it was that he doesn't have evidence that it actually happened. And that's a key point, Gaffney observed. What I think he's stating there and has elsewhere is if there is reason to suspect that our government is being suborned or our government is otherwise now under undue influence from foreign agents, or a candidate is, or an election may be, that there is a duty to look into it, he said of Brennan's testimony. The question just keeps coming back. So was there, in fact, the kind of evidence that would suggest actually this wasn't just a possibility that happened? that seems to still be absent, which is all the more amazing given the amount of time, energy that's being expended, to say nothing of the money that's being expended investigating this lack of evidence by investigative and legislative branch folks, said Gaffney. Because Sam asked if the public might become bored with the Russians are under the bed refrain from President Trump's adversaries. I happen to think the Russians are a very big problem, Gaffney responded. I hope what comes out of this is the heightened awareness that they are not our friends. One of the things I believe very much needs to be done is, rather than chase the will of the wisp, let's get these investigators looking into actual evidence, abundant evidence, in fact, that exists of assorted Democratic officials, including notably former Secretary of State Hillary Clinton, John Podesta, Bill Clinton, and Barack Obama, who engaged in activities with Russians, he added. Collusion, I think, is not too strong a term for it, certainly suborning of them and of our national interest, Gaffney said. Those should absolutely be looked at and against the prism of the Russians not being our friends. I didn't see John Brennan expressing any interest in those sorts of investigations at all, either when he was in office or now, for that matter. He advised the Trump administration not to attempt blocking investigations and instead insist that the investigators, both Robert Mueller and the congressional investigators, broaden the focus investigations to ensure that we get actual investigation into the full extent of Russian influence operations, whether they were aimed at this past election or previous elections, or simply stealing our technology or otherwise subverting our national interest. There's a lot of that to explore, said Gaffney. It would be the height of folly, and I think a waste of all of that effort and resources and so on, if the focus is so narrow that it only looks under the lamplight, as they say, but not where the drunk dropped his keys. The next article is off of Liberty Headlines. Is a running in the wheel. And it says 59% of Democrats believe Russia changed vote to elect Trump. The majority of Democrats believe Russians hacked into voting machines during the presidential election and changed vote tallies to elect Donald Trump, according to a new Economist YouGov.com. Get it to scroll up a little bit. Asked whether Russians tampered with the vote tallies in order to get Donald Trump elected president, 59% of Democrats said it was either definitely true or probably true, whereas only 14% of Republicans said the same. The poll was conducted May 20th through the 23rd. The sample gives a insert. That's what I was looking for, an insert of this poll if you want to pull it up and take a look at it in this article. YouGov poll. It says the same poll conducted a week earlier found 55% of Democrats believed Russia hacked vote tallies. The next article is off of BizPac Review. And it says, former CIA director admits Obama knew about Russian meddling but did nothing to stop it. Former acting director of the CIA believes the Obama administration did nothing to stop interference by Russia in the presidential election. Michael Morrell, who left the CIA in 2013 after serving under former President Obama, questioned the lack of follow-through by the administration when it had reportedly warned the Russian government about its interference. Morrell commented during an appearance on CBS This Morning on Wednesday, discussing former CIA Director John Brennan's testimony Tuesday at a House Intelligence Committee hearing. Brennan revealed that Obama had warned Russian President Vladimir Putin about Russia's alleged meddling in the U.S. election about a month after he himself had spoken to Alexander Bortkinov, Russia's head of Federal Security Services. What struck me is that the U.S. government was concerned enough last summer about Russian interference in the election that they had the CIA director make contact with his Russian counterpart and tell them to stop, Morell said Wednesday. So my question is, what did the Obama administration do after that? After they learned that the warning had fallen on deaf ears, he questioned. Well, it appears they did nothing, CBS host Norah O'Donnell said. Morell agreed. It appeared they did nothing, he echoed. The next article is off of Liberty Headlines. It says DOJ says Sessions was instructed not to list certain meetings. The Justice Department defended Attorney General Jeff Sessions from a CNN report alleging he failed to disclose meetings with Russian officials in his background check before assuming office. As a United States Senator, the Attorney General met hundreds, if not thousands, of foreign dignitaries and their staff. In filling out his SF-86 form, the Attorney General staff consulted with those familiar with the process, as well as the FBI investigators handling the background check, and was instructed not to list meetings with foreign dignitaries and their staff connected with his Senate activities. Justice Department Deputy Director of Public Affairs Ian Pryor said in a statement Wednesday evening. A CNN report published Wednesday stated Sessions failed to disclose meetings with Russian officials and other foreign contacts on a security clearance form he filled out while going through the Senate confirmation process. Sessions was asked to share any contact he had with foreign government or its representatives over the past 7 years, officials said. According to the report, however, he skipped over 2 meetings with Russia officials, as well as many others that are not yet known. Sessions did reportedly have a list of a year's worth of meetings, but was told by an FBI employee who helped him fill out the form to remove any meetings he had pertaining to his role as senator. The next article is off of Conservative Tribune. CNN cites person familiar with thinking of Comey as a source. Another leftist network jumped on the mainstream propaganda train Saturday by publishing a hit piece against President Donald Trump, again based on sketchy, unidentified sources. Former FBI Director James Comey now believes that President Donald Trump was trying to influence his judgment about the Russia probe, a person familiar with his thinking says, but whether that influence amounts to obstruction of justice remains open question, CNN reported. What does it mean the network source is familiar with Comey's thinking? Is he a mind reader? Did he hear Comey specifically say Trump had been trying to influence his judgment, or is he merely making assumptions based on what he believes to be true? There's no way to know. Happen to be true of every source that has been cited by the liberal media in the past few weeks to attack the president. Common element is in nearly all the major stories about President Donald Trump this week is that they are based on source documents on They are based on source documents the outlets cannot authenticate, do not possess, admit are partial, and refuse to share, Breitbart senior editor at large Joel noted in a column published on Friday. For the elite mainstream media, when it comes to protecting Democrats or attacking Republicans, there are no journalistic standards, no ethics, and no shame, he added. Pollock has a point, especially considering that CNN appears to now be trusting the words of an alleged mind reader. It's no wonder the mainstream media credibility with the American people has plummeted. And since the publication of this story on Saturday, the Washington Post has run its own hit piece accusing Trump of asking 2 top intelligence officials to help him push back against FBI investigation into possible coordination between his campaign and the Russian government. Not shockingly, the sources for this piece were unidentified and unnamed current and former officials. It appears the mainstream media of stopping its proliferation of unverified claims and unnamed sources, at least while Trump is in office. An unnamed source with X-ray vision has revealed to us that in his diary, the president lists Conservative Tribune as his all-time favorite website news commentary. Hey, it's at least as reliable as CNN's reporting. The next article, oh, these people have a sense of humor. The next article is off of Medium Corporation, and it says, Lindsay's leaker, how a never-Trump legislative aide with no national security experience landed at the NSC. When Senator Lindsey Graham's longtime legislative assistant, Virginia Boney, who specialized in healthcare legislation, was hired to be a legislative affairs chief for the National Security Council, more than a few heads turned. Boney, who is anti-Trump, has no meaningful national security experience. She was also hired instead of several veterans who applied for the position. McMaster took her in exchange for Lindsay's and McCain's support, one source with knowledge of the deal told me. Several others confirmed this assessment, noting Boney is completely unqualified to be at NSC. Before working at NSC, Boney was deputy director of appropriations and projects for Senator Graham. She specialized in healthcare policy and reform. Multiple sources on Capitol Hill have told me that if they want to know what President Trump is doing, they talk to Boney because she loves to talk about how important and plugged in she is. Many of the leaks about Trump have come from congressional members and staffed by Boney, who is also close with Senator John McCain. Boney's betrayal of trust is what we've come to expect from Trump's White House, where, according to the running joke, the only way you can get hired is if you tweeted #NeverTrump. And it says, developing, Mike Cernovich is a journalist, filmmaker, and others, or an author. His popular book is about emotional control and physical health. So there you have that article. The next one and last one for today is off BizPac Review. It says, U.S. officials keep leaking info to the press, and now the British are ticked. British police have stopped sharing information about the Manchester Arena bombing investigation with U.S. after leaks the media, the BBC reported on Thursday. Home Secretary Amber Rudd was warned of the U.S. Wednesday about irritating leaks despite assurances from American officials. Images from the attack appeared in the New York Times just hours later, which was the final straw for British authorities. Prime Minister Theresa May will raise issue with President Donald Trump at NATO summit Thursday in Brussels. Officials believe the leaks are coming from U.S. law enforcement rather than the White House. The same leaks appeared after 7/7 bombings on London's subway system in 2005, when 52 people were killed by 4 suicide bombers in coordinated attacks. I'm afraid it just reminds me exactly of what happened after 7/7, when the U.S. published a complete picture of the way the bombs in 7/7 had been made up, and we had the same protests, said Lord Ian Blair, former chief of the Metropolitan Police, according to The Guardian. U.S. media outlets released the initial death toll and details about the attack before British police released the information to the UK media. So there you have all the news that I have for you this morning, all the hot topics. If you like what I'm doing here, give it a thumbs up, share it on your social media so everybody gets to enjoy the news. And don't forget to subscribe. That way you'll stay informed. Have a great day.